Shepherd Daily with Ben Dankaka. Leadership Coach. On this channel, we build leaders through access to accurate information. Begin your leadership journey as Ben Dankaka introduces you to the PCS model of leadership: people leadership, career leadership, and self-leadership. Start your leadership journey now, because we want you to lead. Get ready to take the lead. Alright, it's good to be with you again on Shepherd Daily. My name is Ben Dankaka. On Shepherd Daily, we'll build leaders through access to accurate information. It is my desire that you and I will become the leaders we were created to be. Alright, we began our discussion on how to become a person of true influence in your field of interest in my previous video. And in that video, we began by talking about the basic barriers to becoming an influential person in your field of interest. We began by saying that those barriers aren't necessarily ineffective, but they obviously do not enable us become true influencers in our field of interest. You cannot depend on those things, and that is why we call them barriers. Those are things we usually feel we ought to have or be in order to become influential in our field of interest. So we were able to clear that out in order for us to focus on what really matters. And we're able to settle that matter in order to clear the way for us to focus on the KUWP formula for becoming an influential person in your field of interest. And we began our discussion on the KUWP in the previous video by talking about knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Now, these basic principles are principles that have been tested and trusted. These are universal basic principles to becoming a person of influence. We know from history that anyone who was truly influential in his field or in her field of interest used these basic principles in order to get to the top. And we also realize that knowledge, understanding, and wisdom actually work together. In other words, they are members of the same family. They do not work independently. In order for you to become a true person of influence in your field of interest, you must understand how knowledge, understanding, and wisdom go together. It is by applying these three basic principles of leadership that you'll be able to become a true person of influence in your field of interest. So the steps towards becoming a true influential person in your industry begins with knowledge acquisition. And we'll talk about the first thing that you should be looking at once you become interested in a particular field of endeavor is to begin to seek for ways in which you can acquire knowledge. The acquisition of knowledge is the first step towards you becoming a person of influence in your field of interest. You have to come up with ways in which you can accumulate as much knowledge as you can. That means you don't just depend on formal education like schools or training programs, but you have to do your own personal study. And we suggested that one great way in which you can actually maximize this process is by reading a lot of books. It is through books that you'll be able to discover a lot of ideas regardless of your field of interest. It doesn't matter the field of interest. I know that there are books that have been written on virtually every field of endeavor that you can think of. Even if you can't find books, you can find magazines, you can read a lot of interviews. The most important thing is to develop a learning habit by gathering a lot of information. And you do that through books, you do that through mentorship. That means you have to depend on people. You try as much as possible to learn from people. When it comes to learning, you have to humble yourself. It doesn't matter whether the person you're learning from is older than you. The background of the person you're learning from doesn't really matter. The most important thing is for you to acquire all the knowledge that you can from that person. And another thing you need to do again in the process of acquiring knowledge is what? Observation. That means you have to do your own personal observation. You have to see how you can use your creativity, look around you and see how you can observe new things that has to do with your field of interest. Gather new ideas, gather new information that has to do with your field of interest. But then again, you must understand that knowledge is useless if you don't have understanding. For instance, this book contains knowledge. It has ideas and information. But the ideas and information in this book will be useless to me if I don't understand what these ideas are. I am not a science student, but if you give me a book on science, on physics, on chemistry, I can read it. That way I'll be acquiring knowledge about the book. But then if I don't understand the contents in that book, that means the knowledge I have acquired is useless to me. For you to progress as a learner, you must move on from knowledge accumulation, from knowledge acquisition to what? Understanding. And it is at the process of understanding that you are able to fully grasp what you have gathered. You are able to fully own what you have gathered. So you don't actually take ownership over the knowledge you have acquired until you understand it. Yes, I bought this book with my own money. The book belongs to me. But then I do not have ownership over the ideas in this book until I understand it. As long as I don't understand the ideas in this book, the ideas, the information in this book is that is why it is very, very important for you to have understanding. One reason why many people do not truly become influential in their field of interest, especially people who depend so much on formal education, is that they go to school, they are not really interested in the books that they give them to read. They are only interested in studying those books in order to pass their examinations. So what they do, they study these books, cram the ideas in these books, and when it's time to write their exams, they do well. And then they graduate with excellent results. But at the end of the day, they do not actually have an understanding of the ideas they studied in those books. So by the time they graduate from school, they find themselves unable to make use of the certificates they have in a practical way. So at the end of the day, you find someone who is knowledgeable in a certain area, has degrees, has certificates, has titles, and so on, but they are unable to put it into practice because they lack understanding. Now, how do you put something into practice? The very act of putting something into practice is what we call wisdom. And that is why we say that wisdom is the application of knowledge. Wisdom is the application of knowledge. So in order for you to be able to apply the knowledge that you have, you must first of all have understanding. Understanding is key. But unfortunately, that is one process that most people usually ignore. Why? Because it involves a mental exercise. For you to really understand anything, you must make the best use of your mind. You don't just read at that level, but you study at that level. You don't just learn at that level, but you also meditate at that level. But most people always avoid the labor of thinking. Most people always avoid the labor of meditation. Most people always avoid the labor that comes with studying, and for that reason they fail to become wise despite the fact that they acquire a lot of knowledge. So for you to be truly influential in your field of interest, whether you like it or not, you must go through this process, and it begins with knowledge, then you move on to understanding, which is very critical. Somehow, interestingly, you'll find that understanding is in the middle. In other words, it is the soul. It is the soul of learning. For you to really become a true learner, for you to move on from becoming a learner to a leader, to someone who is influential, you must pass through the process of understanding, which is the very soul. So by the time you are able to understand whatever knowledge you have acquired, you must put it to practice. And that is why wisdom is essentially about taking action. Wisdom is important because it is at that stage that you apply the knowledge that you already have. But then again, there is another important aspect of wisdom, and that is what? Judgment. For you to truly prove that you are a wise person, you must be able to judge right. I remember the story of King Solomon. King Solomon was a man who became a leader at a very young age. But at that time, he was wise enough to realize that if there's anything he needed at that point was wisdom. And so he asked God for wisdom, which he got. But then again, when you read the story closely, you will discover that no one ever recognized him as a wise person, as someone who had wisdom, until he judged a particular case between two women who were fighting over one baby. And because he was able to discern the true mother of the baby, he was instantly recognized as a wise man, as a wise ruler. So you can see that being wise in whatever field of interest, for Solomon, it was about kingship. But for you, it could be in your business, in your own field of interest. For you to be recognized as someone who has wisdom, you must have the ability to judge right. And what do you judge in your own field of interest? That's for you to figure out. For you to know the difference between right and wrong. For you to know the difference between good and bad, for you to know the difference between evil and good in your field of interest. It means wisdom. It means that you are able to judge effectively. And it is at that point that people will begin to recognize you as a true leader, because they will depend on you for decisions. They will come to you for advice. They will come to you for suggestions. They will have difficult situations and they will look up to you and see you as a problem solver, as the guy who can provide the solution to this particular problem. So it begins with knowledge, and then it moves on to you having understanding of the knowledge you have acquired before you now move on to what? Wisdom. By the time you get to that wisdom level in your field of interest, it is that time that people will begin to recognize you. That is when people will begin to take notice of your skills, of your talent, of your intelligence. It is at that time that people will begin to depend on you, because they cannot solve their own problems. They come to you and say, hey, solve this problem for us because we trust you. But then again, even though you are wise, at that time, even though you have the ability to discern the difference between good and evil, or the difference between right and wrong, at that level of your professional growth, it is not yet over. From the wisdom stage, you have to move on to what we call the P factor. Now, what does this P mean? P simply means power. Now, I will go back to the story of Solomon again. It was after Solomon was able to judge effectively that case between those two women. It is at that point that he became powerful in his kingdom. So this is what usually happens. If you now have the ability to acquire knowledge, and then you are able to understand that knowledge that you have acquired, because it is not every knowledge that you truly need. Now, if you are able to acquire all the knowledge that you need, and then you have an understanding of that knowledge, which now gives you wisdom. Now, the wisdom gives you the ability to do what? To judge. In other words, it gives you the ability to rule. Who is a judge? A judge is actually someone who rules. Why is a judge able to rule? Because a judge is able to discern what is right and what is wrong. So when you get to that point where you are knowledgeable, and then you move on to having understanding of the knowledge that you have, then you become wise. That wisdom is what actually gives you the ability to rule in your field of interest. So it is not just kings that rule. Solomon was able to rule effectively in his kingdom because he had wisdom. You are expected to also rule effectively in your field of interest because of the wisdom you've acquired concerning issues that has to do with your field. So now you've attained wisdom. You now have the ability to judge, to know what is right and wrong. Now that ability now makes you a ruler. It makes you someone that is able to control things in your industry. It makes you become someone that people depend on. That way, you naturally become powerful. Who is a powerful person? A powerful person is not that person with physical might. A powerful person is actually not that person who has knowledge. I know you've heard that before. Knowledge is power. But knowledge isn't actually power. What truly gives birth to power is wisdom. It is when you have the ability to rule, to make certain decisions that people will agree is right. It is at that point that you truly become a powerful person in your field of interest. And a powerful person is one who is naturally a person of influence. If you call yourself an influential person and you are not powerful in your field of interest, then you are not truly influential. So it is power that truly gives birth to influence. If you want to become a person of influence in your field of interest, if you want to become a person of influence in your field of interest, then you must go through all this process I have mentioned. You must begin your journey by acquiring a lot of knowledge concerning your field of interest, and then you try as much as possible to do what most people always avoid to do, which is what? Understanding whatever thing that you have acquired, so that you will take ownership, so that it will sink into your system. That is the soul of your learning system. And then at that point, you begin to move on. You begin to develop the capacity to be wise, develop the capacity to make the right decisions, to make the right judgment that people will see and truly come to you and depend on you. Once you become a wise person, you will be seen as a ruler in your field of interest. And that status is what truly makes you a person of influence in your field of interest. So I hope you found this message very useful to your career. If you want to learn more and develop the strategies that will enable you become the leader that you desire to be, you can actually participate in my VIP leadership program. Believe me, my desire is for you and I to become the leaders we were born to be. And that's it on this edition of Shepherd Daily. If you enjoyed this edition, you can kindly like, share, and comment. And one great way you can show us some appreciation is by subscribing to this YouTube channel. Have a great day.
Your daily guide to greatness. We show you how to take the lead in every area of your life. Self-leadership, people leadership, and career leadership. Start your leadership journey now.